The year was 1415, and an African empire was about to change the world. When we think of African history, we often think of it as something distant, something that happened to other people in other times. But the truth is far more powerful. African history is your history. It's the story of innovation, resilience, and civilizations that shaped human progress itself. Imagine standing on the coast of Portugal in 1415. Prince Henry the Navigator is launching expeditions down the African coast. But here's what many don't realize. He's not discovering anything. Africans had already mapped, traded, and traveled these routes for centuries. The Kingdom of Mali had already sent its own explorers across the Atlantic in 1311, when Emperor Mansa Musa's predecessor dispatched 200 ships on a westward voyage. African navigation wasn't new. European documentation of it was. Let's test your knowledge of what really happened. In 1324, Mansa Musa of Mali completed the Hajj to Mecca. This single journey reveals everything about African power and sophistication. He traveled with 60,000 people, 80 camels carrying 4 pounds of gold each, and so much wealth that he crashed the gold market across the Mediterranean and Middle East. His pilgrimage took him through Cairo, where witnesses recorded his magnificence in written accounts that still survive today. Imagine the logistics. Imagine the organization required. This wasn't a small expedition. This was a state performing on the world stage. But Mali wasn't alone. Consider the kingdom of Axum in modern-day Ethiopia. Between the 1st and 7th centuries, Axum minted its own coins, maintained diplomatic relations with Rome, Persia, and India, and controlled the Red Sea trade routes. They had their own written language called Ge'ez, still used in Ethiopian churches today. They built architectural monuments that rivaled anything in the Mediterranean world. Yet how many history books mention Axum? Then there's Great Zimbabwe. Between the 11th and 15th centuries, this civilization in southern Africa constructed a massive stone fortress without mortar. The walls still stand today, reaching heights of 36 feet. They controlled the gold trade from the interior down to the coast. They had a sophisticated government, complex trade networks, and architectural expertise that challenges every stereotype about pre-colonial Africa. Here's what the historical record actually shows us. In 1591, the Songhai Empire's capital of Timbuktu was home to universities like the Sankore Mosque, where scholars studied astronomy, mathematics, law, and medicine. Manuscripts from this period still exist. Advanced learning, complex institutions. In a world where Europe was still emerging from what many call the Dark Ages, African empires were centers of intellectual achievement. This is where the real test begins. Not a test of memorization, but a test of perspective. When you learn that the Library of Alexandria held African texts, when you discover that Egyptian mathematics and engineering shaped Greek philosophy, when you understand that African ironworking technology spread across the continent, what changes? Everything changes. Because African history isn't separate from world history. It's foundational to it. The technological advances, the trade networks, the governmental systems, the artistic expressions, the mathematical concepts, they all flowed in multiple directions across continents. Yet for centuries, African contributions were minimized, erased, or attributed to others. Colonizers rewrote narratives. Historians ignored primary sources. Entire civilizations were rendered invisible in textbooks you probably studied. We need to take this test seriously. Not because we're trying to prove something, but because understanding African history properly means understanding human history properly. It means recognizing that Africa didn't wait for Europe to develop civilization. Africa was developing civilization while Europe was still consolidating power. The test isn't Rhea,